Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news hour, we shall be discussing the important articles related to economy from the Hindu newspaper. In the editorial page, there is an article about the Sri Lankan economic crisis again. The article says that one of the major reasons for the crisis is the apathetic political leadership, and now people are on the streets to keep the political leadership responsible, and people want to overthrow the entire regime. At this juncture, even the opposition has to be ready to take on the reins of the government, but the opposition doesn't look like it is in a good place. And a new finance minister was appointed, and he didn't take charge because the amount of work that has to be done in the economy is so tremendous. The finance minister didn't seem it right to take charge, and there was lack of confidence. And there is apparent division even within the ruling party, and the ruling party faces the loss of majority in the parliament. And the article says that at this juncture, what the economy needs is a proper economic recovery plan and someone to approach the international leaders, get them in confidence, and get loans to Sri Lanka so that Sri Lanka could be come out of the macroeconomic instability. And what could be possibly done? Sri Lanka needs a bridge loan. Here we will discuss what is a bridge loan. Bridge loan is basically a short-term loan ranging from few days to few weeks. So that's why the name bridge loan. And external debt restructuring plan. Debt restructuring is when the creditor feels that the debtor is not able to pay the debt, and if the creditor doesn't change the terms and conditions of the debt, the debtor won't be able to pay it and the debt will become a non-performing asset. So through the debt restructuring, the nature of the debt will be changed. What would be done here? Some concessions would be given. It can be done in various forms. One of the forms could be that the loan repayment period could be extended. The debtor would be given more time to pay back the loan, or the creditor could give interest cut. So saying instead of paying 10%, you just pay me 6% of interest on the loan. Or it could be haircut. Haircut is when the creditor says instead of paying me X amount, you reduce that amount by other Y percentage and you pay me the remaining amount. So all this is done by the creditor so that the debtor is allowed to make loan in some freedom because he is not able to do it at the current financial position. Otherwise, if the creditor doesn't allow these concessions, the entire debt could go bad. That's why these concessions are allowed. So Sri Lanka also needs a debt restructuring plan with the external countries that it has borrowed from, and to achieve all this it needs a credible leadership. Otherwise the country could get stuck in this current debt trap that is in, and it could go for sovereign default. Sovereign default is when a country, sovereign nation, it takes a loan and it defaults on that loan. That is known as sovereign default, and it is also on the brink of bankruptcy because the amount foreign exchange that it needs to maintain its essential goods imports and the amount that is had in its reserves is very less. And it also need to take some measures. For example, it needs to reduce on the number of government officials that are being paid, and too much excessive expenditure on security, and people in the power, they are being corrupt, and lack of production to domestic production. We saw how Sri Lanka is majorly primary goods producing economy. It exports tea and rubber, and because of the COVID pandemic those got affected, and the centralized decision making has to be decentralized because of the policies of the central government, wherein they went for tax cuts, they went for VAT tax cuts, and they went for sudden change to chemical farming, from chemical farming to organic farming. So all these got affected because of the centralized decision making. So if there is decentralized decision making, the power of decision making would be spread in many hands and someone could be kept accountable. And all this happened because of the election results. So the article says that it is for the people to realize that they should not vote based on emotional issues like race, religion, because it only helps the ruling class which comes to power and it doesn't help them on the ground. So this is the right time for Sri Lanka to go for the proper political and socio-economic change, which could finally lead to the economic change. We can see here clearly how the politics and the economy are interlinked and the effect of each is felt on the other. In the explainer page, there is a article about the Antarctic Bill. Recently, the central government introduced the Indian Antarctic Bill for 2022 to regulate the activities of the research station in Antarctica. Basically, India has few research stations in Antarctica, and what will happen if some unlawful activity takes place in that research station? So there has to be some law with respect to that. So that is why the government has got the Indian Antarctic Bill 2022. So what are the provisions of this particular bill? Let's go into the details. The bill seeks to regulate the visits and activities to Antarctica and possible disputes that might arise on that continent. And it has various penal provisions, just like the IPC that is there for Indian territory. This bill tries to put penal provisions for the unlawful activities and illegal activities that takes place on Antarctica with respect to the Indian research stations. And it also needs to regulate the private tours and expeditions to Antarctica, and that would be prohibited without a permit, and it would need a written authorization before someone can go there. All this is to be managed through the Antarctic Treaty, which was signed in 1959. Currently there are 54 signatories to the treaty, and India joined the treaty in 1983. So we need to note here that India was not a founding member, but India later on joined to that treaty. And the bill also seeks to give power to the government officials to inspect any vessel and conduct checks of the research facilities. The bill also wants to create a Antarctic fund to protect the Antarctic environment and to extend the jurisdiction of Indian courts to Antarctica, and the penal provisions for all the crimes if it takes place on the continent by Indian citizens and the foreigners who are working in the Indian research stations. The provisions of this particular bill would be applicable. Currently India has two research stations there. One is Bharati and other one is Maitri. The first expedition of India to Antarctica was in 1982. And the bill also wants to set up a committee known as the Committee on Antarctic Governance and Environmental Protection, and the bill prohibits mining and dredging. Dredging is removing salt and ice. So because the bill wants to protect, there is a committee for environmental protection, and it prohibits mining and dredging in the pristine conditions of the continent. And it bans any person, vessel or aircraft from disposing waste in Antarctica and testing of nuclear devices when it comes to the territory that is maintained by India. Currently, why was this bill necessary? As we have discussed, even though India became a party to the Antarctic Treaty in 1983, as per the treaty, the countries had to make laws with respect to their own nations and the research basis. But India had not made a law, and what if some unlawful activity takes place there, because of which currently we are getting this law. When compared to the two stations of India, China has around 5 and Russia also have 5 stations. And India is also party to the Convention on Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources and the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty. So both this treaty, the Convention on Conservation of Marine Living Resources Treaty and the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty, both these focus on protecting the environmental habitat of Antarctica. That is why here if we just discussed how we are going to have a committee for Antarctic governance and protection, and we are prohibiting mining and dredging activities when it comes to the territory that is controlled by India. And every year many people visit Antarctica on tourism, and this has to be regulated. There has to be some basis of law for that, and because of the increase in fishing activities there, the fishing also needs to be regulated so that we protect the environment of Antarctica. Because of all this, we need a bill. And what is the history of the Antarctic Treaty? 12 countries joined it in 1961 and ratified it. The treaty covers all the area that is to the south of 60-degree latitude, and the objectives of the treaty are to demilitarize Antarctica, to make it as a zone free of nuclear test, and there is no disposable of radioactive waste there, and to ensure that Antarctica is used for only research and peaceful purposes, to promote international scientific cooperation, and to set aside disputes over the territorial sovereignty, because Antarctica is no man's land, it doesn't belong to any country. And of the 54 countries, 29 countries have consultative status with respect to the treaty, and these get voting rights. And every year the parties to the treaty, they meet and they adopt various recommendations and rules. Together, the rules and the objectives of this Antarctic Treaty, collectively they are known as the ATS, that is Antarctic Treaty System. And what about the research that India is conducting? Until now, India had around 37 expeditions to Antarctica, and the major focus of Indian Antarctic program is to focus on the research with respect to climate change, the link between climate change and the environment, and conservation of the environment, reduce the climate change, and developing technology related to the polar areas. That's about this article. In the business page, we can see that the auto manufacturer sales are falling, and that's mainly because of the supply chain disruptions. The chip shortage has still have the effect on the automobile industry, and we have been discussing that the rural consumption demand is low. If the rural consumption demand is low, the rural demand mainly affects the two-wheeler bike segment. So if the rural consumption demand is low, the two-wheeler bike segment would get affected. And currently, because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the lockdowns in China again, the supply chain is again getting disrupted. We can skip the news related to the HDFC Bank and this news related to passenger vehicles. Here, global bond sales to surpass 10 trillion in 2022. Because of the COVID pandemic, even though the economies of all the nations are slightly recovering now, still the government needs amount, because during the pandemic the revenues of the governments from the taxes had reduced because the business activity was reduced. So in order to continue the economy and to revive the trend in the economy of demand and consumption, the governments need to borrow. For that, countries would go for global sovereign borrowing, wherein, for example, if India has to borrow, it would borrow from external sectors through raising money through the international market, or through going to international organizations like IMF or World Bank. And despite the economic recovery, borrowing will increase because of debt rollover requirements. What is debt rollover? When you take a loan, instead of repaying that loan, you renew that loan. That is known as rollover. You renew the loan by paying the loan and taking the same loan with the same amount. So that is known as debt rollover, because you are just closing that loan account and opening a different loan account by transferring this amount here. You are rolling over the debt, the repayment of the debt to a future debt. So in simple words, renewing the loan is known as debt rollover. And because of the tightening monetary conditions and reduction in supply in the economy, the government funding cost will also go up, especially those countries which are not performing very well, the African and Middle East Asian countries. They have to give a higher rate compared to economies which are performing well. So even when it comes to sovereign borrowing, the countries with high risk have to pay more, because the investor would want more return for the more risk that he is willing to take. So in finance, always more risk means more return. And the research also says that the corporate default could also increase. because of the reduction in economic activity and reduction in business, the corporates also can default on their bonds, and the corporate default rate could reach to almost 8.5%. We can skip the news related to TVS. Here just need the read the heading, and we need to know that the cotton prices are increasing. The production is low, and because of low supply in the economy of cotton, the basic raw material of cotton in the market is increasing. So this will have repercussions and rollover effect on the textile industry, wherein the prices of textiles would also increase in the coming months when the manufacturers would pass on the increased cotton cost, that is the increased raw material cost, to the retail customer. So in coming time you can observe that the cost of textiles would be higher. We can skip this news. These are the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.